Hi everyone and welcome to the tutorial. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to cast on for your Morsel shawl. The Morsel shawl pattern has an I-cord border that travels all the way around the perimeter of the shawl and is worked seamlessly and at the same time as the main body of the shawl. To ensure that this I-cord does have a seamless finish all the way around, we need to start our shawl here at the cast on tip with an I-cord tab cast on. You may have worked a garter tab cast on in the past, and the I-cord tab cast on follows the same principles as the garter tab cast on. It's just that rather than starting with a little tab of garter stitch, we start with a little tab that looks like the I-cord that we create in the rest of the shawl instructions. Once we've done our cast on, we'll be working our shawl this way in rows. Let's get straight into the demonstration. The first thing we're going to do for our I-cord tab cast on is to provisionally cast on a few stitches. My favourite method for this is the crochet chain cast on. If you have an alternative provisional cast on method of choice that you prefer, please feel free to substitute it in. You just want to make sure that you're creating 3 stitches in the provisional cast on, and that when you later undo your provisional cast on edge, you'll be able to pick up 3 stitches as well. For the crochet chain cast on method, we need a crochet hook, and I'm using the same size crochet hook as the knitting needle size that I'm using for my shawl. So I'm doing an alternative DK weight version of the shawl. I'm substituting in my own yarn weight, and I've decided to use 4.5mm knitting needles. So I've also grabbed a 4.5mm crochet hook to match. If you don't have exactly the same sized crochet hook as your knitting needle size that you're choosing, that's okay. Just try to pick a crochet hook that's close enough to your knitting needle size. So say for instance you're using the 5.5mm needle for your shawl, but you've only got a 5mm crochet hook, that's fine. It's easy enough to substitute in and your results will still be great. We also need some smooth contrasting colour waste yarn. And again, I'm using about the same weight of yarn as what I'm using for my shawl project when I actually cast it on proper. So because that's going to be in DK weight yarn, I've got a little bit of scrap DK weight yarn here as well. But again, if you don't have exactly the same weight of yarn, close enough is good enough. You want this yarn to be smooth because when we later undo our crochet chain, if you're using a hairy or grippy yarn, it's going to be very hard to undo that provisional cast on edge. And you want it to be in a contrasting color so that you can see where the edge is very easily. And don't worry about this yarn clashing with the yarn you've chosen for your shawl project, because you're going to undo this and discard it, so it won't actually be part of your finished shawl project. Okay, so I'm going to make a crochet chain, and to do that I'm going to start with a slip knot, and you make that slip knot just as you would if you were creating the first stitch of a knitted cast on. So it's just like this, and there's our slip knot. I'm going to put that slip knot on the head of my crochet hook, and then I'm going to start making a chain. So to do that, I'm going to draw this longer tail of yarn through the loop of yarn that's on my crochet hook using the head of the crochet hook. And we wrap the yarn the opposite direction around the crochet hook as how we usually wrap our yarn in knitting. So in knitting, you'd be wrapping your yarn this way. In crochet, we go the opposite way. So it's like a reverse yarn over, and then draw that loop through the loop on the crochet hook, and that's one chain. And then again, reverse yarn over, draw it through the loop on the crochet hook, that's 2 chain, and we'll keep repeating that until we get to 10 chain. Just count how many I've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll do 2 more. And this length of waste yarn that I have is probably not quite as long as what would be ideal. So if you find it awkward and you run out of waste yarn, just grab another piece that's slightly longer. But that was just enough to do my 10 chain. Now I'm going to fasten off this chain by pulling this little tail that remains through the loop that was on my crochet hook. and that'll fasten it. There we go. There's our completed chain. Now, my work says to flip the chain over and begin picking up and knitting stitches into these bumps that are on the reverse side of the chain. But it also says that the end of chain that can unravel needs to be at the far right end of my work when I begin doing that. Now I know that this is the end of chain that can unravel because it's where the chain ended. So if we were unraveling, we would unravel it back the way we came. So this is the end that can unravel. I've just flipped my work over like that, so I haven't changed that. This is still the end that can unravel here. But if I put this down, if I accidentally drop it, I may lose which is the end that can unravel. So what I like to do is just put a little knot in that end. So it's just a little knot in the tail like that, and that tells me that this is the end that can unravel. It's just a little visual reminder. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's just my little tip that I always do. So we'll just flip it over so we've got those bumps facing us again. And we're now ready to put our crochet hook away and to pick up our working needle and yarn that we're using for our shawl. We're going to skip a few chain, and then we're going to pick up and knit 3 stitches, 1 in each bump on the reverse side of chain. So skip a few, so I'll start here. I'm going to insert my needle so that I'm picking up the bump that was there. I'll leave a bit of a tail of yarn so that I can weave that in later. And then I'll pick up, so that was the pick up part, and then I'll knit a stitch. So that's 1. Then I'll pick up the next bump and knit. So that's 2 picked up and knit stitches. And then that's my 3rd. So if you've substituted in an alternative provisional cast on method of choice, this is where you want to meet back with us, making sure that you've got 3 stitches. We're now ready to do the I-cord tab part of our I-cord tab cast on. To create an I-cord, you slide your stitches to the other end of your needle and then work across the right side of the stitches from right to left. You then slide the stitches to the other end of your needle once more and again work across them from right to left. And in this process you're pulling your working yarn across the back of the stitches so it's in the correct position to then knit across them this way. So by constantly working across the right side of the stitches, you're essentially working in the round. So you're making a small tube of stockinette stitch. You do need to make sure that you're using either a circular needle for this or double pointed needles, something that has 2 ends so that you can work across the stitches when you slide them to the other end of the needle. So straight needles with a stopper won't work for this. I'm using a circular needle, so I'm going to slide these stitches now to the other end of the circular needle and then pulling the working yarn, which is over here, across the back of my work. I will then knit across these stitches normally, so I'll get my tails out of the way so you can see. So the working yarn is just being pulled across the back of the stitches, and then I'm going to knit those 3 stitches as you would normally. Then I'll once again slide my stitches to the other end of my circular needle. So this is the part of the pattern that says slide stitches to other end of circular needle and knit 3. We did that once, the pattern says to do it twice, so this is the 2nd time. So again, pull the working yarn across the back of the stitches and then knit 3. So 1, 2, 3. And there's our I-cord tab. So if we were looking at our stitches this way, we then want to rotate our work 90 degrees clockwise so that we now have the edge of the I-cord pointing up. And the pattern says to pick up and knit 1 stitch in the first worked row of the I-cord. So this is the first worked row here, this is the second worked row here if we're looking at the V's, and we're going to pick up and knit 1 stitch in the edge of our work. How I like to do this is to split the stitch that I can see here and the next stitch if I was twisting my work around here. So I pick up the far left leg of that stitch that's on the edge, and then this stitch around here sort of is also on the edge. So I make sure I've got two legs, and that's the pickup part, and then the knit is to draw my working yarn through. I just like how that gives me quite a lot of I-cord here. I think if you pick up a knit too far this way, you actually remove this part of the I-cord. You can't see it anymore in your finished shawl project. But if you've got an alternative way that you want to pick up and knit that stitch, it's absolutely fine too. So we just needed to pick up and knit one stitch. We're now going to rotate our work 90 degrees again so that the provisional cast on edge is now facing up. I'll just once again rearrange those tails so they're out of the way. Now you remember that we were told to ensure that the end of chain that could unravel was at the far right end of our work when we began picking up and knitting stitches in that crochet chain. That is so that our orientation is now that we have the end of chain that can unravel at the far left end of our work. And I know that's the end that can unravel because it's got the knot in it. So that allows us to undo our provisional cast on edge and pick up the stitches that are revealed this way. So it's very easy to start undoing your crochet chain. You just want to pull this tail back through that final chain, like so. And then we'll just start unraveling the chain by pulling that end of the yarn. And we chained 10 so that we gave ourselves a buffer of chain on either side of where the provisional stitches are, so that we're not straight away trying to rescue stitches as we undo the chain. So we need to get to the point where our first stitch is, and then we can get our needle ready. So it'll be this stitch here. So that tail is going to be in the way. I'll just move it again. And then as I undo this chain, a little stitch is going to pop out, which is just here. Hopefully you can see it. Yarn's gotten a bit fluffy, so it's getting caught, but there's a stitch, and I just pop it on my needle. And then the next one is there. So you can see how if your yarn was quite hairy, this would be getting caught a lot more than it is. So that's why you want to have a smooth yarn. And then this is going to be my final stitch here. So if I undo that one, I'll just pop that one on the needle, and then I can pull the chain out of the way. So there are our 3 stitches. And we are going to slip these stitches purlwise from our left to our right hand needle without working them. I also want to make sure that my yarn is in back, because it says slip 3 purlwise with yarn in back. My yarn is already at the back from the pick up and knit stitch, but if it wasn't, if it had somehow got to the front, you just pop it in the back now, and you're going to slip those stitches purlwise, which means that you're going to insert your right hand needle into each of those stitches as if you're purling them, so this way, and then you just slip them off the needle like that. So slip 3 purlwise with yarn in back. And there we go. So we're now up to our setup row. We'll do that together. I turn my work, and then this is a wrong side row. And the instructions say to purl 4 and then slip 3 purlwise with yarn in front. So a purl 4 is easy enough. Our working yarn will be 3 stitches back, just here. That's what we want. So we now sort of pull that working yarn across what is now the front of those stitches, but because this is the wrong side of our work and we're going to pull it reasonably tightly, we're going to start getting this I-cord tube along the edge of the shawl, and we're not going to see a float in the front of those stitches, so don't worry about that. So we draw our yarn across, and then we're going to purl 3 here. So purl 4 it is. So purl 1, purl 2, purl 3, and you can see the yarn that I drew across the front of my stitches here, but you can also see how that's beginning to be enclosed by a tube. So that tube is the I-cord edging. There's our 4th purl stitch, and then we're going to slip 3 purlwise with yarn in front. So because I was purling there, my yarn is already at the front of my work, so that's fine, I'll leave that there. And then again, we want to insert our right hand needle purlwise into the stitch to then slip it off. So that's slip 1, slip 2, slip 3 purlwise. And then we turn our work. And you are now ready to start your increase chart A with these stitches. Hopefully you can see how we've got a little example of an I-cord here. That's our tab part. And we'll continue creating the I-cord across the first 3 and last 3 stitches that we have. So we'll always be slipping the last 3 stitches. And that will turn each of these into that I-cord tube. Thank you so much for watching the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon for the next video.